Hello, gentlemen, barbarian savages. The Rooster here, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my next section on my Gyno Planet series, which is Elitist Elysium. Right down here. Okay, so you say, you got some feminism, you got a lot of babies, you get some overpopulation, you got some scarce resources, you got some generational pacification. What comes next after you get men that are married, not married, whatever, on lockdown? Those that are married, you have them shamed, you have their behavior criminalized, you have masculinity generalized as toxic in our society, uh, and all of the decisions start being made from a feminist or a female standpoint. Well, you get what the feminists are trying to get to, which is the feminine paradise, right? Which is the Elysium, right? So here's what you have in the Elysium. You have an area up here, gated communities, ownership, rich alpha males that have a lot of resources, basically all of the resources. And you have the feminine paradise up here where they don't work. They have as many children as they want. They go to whatever colleges they want. They have all of the resources. And down here, you have the police state. You have crime, chaos, food rationing, water rationing, pollution everywhere, no health care, um, controlled travel. The people down here live in the slums, favelas. Um, they're basically considered breeding stock or workers. You have no credit if you live down here, and obviously you have a large level of overpopulation, right? And a lot of this is based on the movie Elysium, if you've ever seen it. Uh, Matt Damon made it. I guess it's about maybe a year or 2 years old, but it's been out there for a while. These ideas have been out there. And the thing about this is, the biggest thing about this is there's nothing in between. You either live down here in the slums or you live up here in a gated community. Okay? And there's nothing, absolutely nothing in between in this Elysium thing. And the idea is it's based a lot on hypergamy and women getting their fantasy of having eights, nines, and tens. And these are all of the owners of society. These are all of the, CEOs and stuff like that. And they're the only people that get any benefits from society anymore. Same thing as basically marriage for the average man. He doesn't get anything out of it. The women get everything out of it. So what's wrong with this feminine paradise other than 99% of the population basically lives as proles or slaves for the other 1%? Well, let's talk about it. There's three really large aspects to the Elysium theory, and that is social elitism, economic elitism, and systemic or statutory elitism, or elitism of the law, police, military. Okay? So let's talk about these three big areas, and we'll talk about how we will eventually get to this point. Are we here yet? No. This is in the future, but I'm sure a lot of you people, if you're living in the United States, you don't even see this as happening. If you're living in Canada, you don't really even see this as happening. You're living in England, you might actually see this. You living in India, you might actually already be feeling this. If you live in India, if you live in Pakistan, if you live anywhere in the Middle East, Africa, stuff like that, you may already be feeling this. The problem with this is takes years and years and years to get to this point. And the people that are in between, so to speak, right now, don't generally see it happening. They don't feel it happening. They just kind of feel they're from generation to generation. They're, my kids, why are my kids shitbags? Why aren't they doing as good as I did? Why didn't I do as good as my grandparents did? Why they had a house by the time they were 22. It took me till I was 40. My kid's 28 years old. He's still living at home and can barely pay off college. There comes a point where you got to realize no matter how hard you work, you can't beat the system. Remember that. It gets to a point where when there's so many feminine decisions being made out there and so much stuff gets wrapped around what females want out of our society that you can't get ahead anymore. So let's talk about the three things: social elitism, economic elitism, and system elitism. Okay. First part, social elitism. The best example of this is by a guy called Dr. Calhoun, who did the mouse utopian experiment back in the 60s. Okay. And he created something that he called Universe 25. And what this was it was a mouse habitat for mice, about 3,000 mice, where they had all of the nutrients that they needed, all the vitamins and minerals, all the comfort that they needed, more than enough housing. It was predator free, cleaned on a daily basis, temperature controlled. Okay? Utopian, female utopian conditions. Everything, all your resources are handed to you on a platter, no predation. Okay? So what happened? Obviously, these mice just were happy as can be, and they just went along, and everything was great, right? Wrong! 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 What actually happened was, in spite of utopian conditions, it was a catastrophic nightmare of mouse society. Let me say that again. In spite of utopian conditions, feminine paradise was a catastrophic fucking nightmare for mouse society. Why? Okay? The larger the population got, the less care was taken for the young. Okay? The more they started fighting amongst each other, even though they didn't need to. There still was the mindset, the male mindset of alpha and beta. They fought each other. Okay? I'm going to show you the graph here that was taken from this study, and I redid it in my wonderful freaking handwriting, right? Here it is. Here's population over time of these mice. And there's the different periods that they used: the strive period, the exploitation period, the equilibrium period, and the decline period. And this is the population of the mice. They started out with about 3,000. Okay? Now what happens during this time, right? There is an adjustment from predation, right? These mice are first put into this happy place, and they still think that there's owls and foxes and cats and everything. They're still trying to get them. So they mark off their territories, they protect their females. Population doesn't change all that much, right? But then there's an adjustment from predation. First day goes by, nobody dies. Second day goes by, nobody dies. Third day goes by. A couple weeks go by, nobody dies. The mice start getting comfortable. Then the second period is the exploitation period. And this is akin to the feminine welfare state, where they have temperature control, they have all the food that they want, they have all the water that they want, they have a nice human maid that comes in, cleans up all their crap, gives them new straw, new hay every single day, perfect cleanliness conditions. What do? The same thing that human beings do. They exploit it. They exploit the welfare state. Everybody gets on the dole. Yay, we start having babies. We start having babies. And that's the same as my overpopulation area that I was talking about in my previous thing, right? So everybody gets on the dole. All the mice, they love it. Population goes to a certain point where it's maxed out. And then what happens? They hit the equilibrium, which is the feminine paradise, right? And population stops going up. It tapers out and basically stays level. And then a new part of society develops where, due to no predation and nobody taking care of the little baby mice, they developed something called the beautiful ones. And the male mice basically just started leaving, going off, forming their own units, forming their own little hovels, their own little nests, and all they did was sleep and groom themselves and sleep and eat and drink water, and they didn't mate with the females. They didn't want the females around. What does that sound like? Sounds a lot like MGTOW to me, right? They realized that they didn't need the females for anything. They had all the food and water that they needed. They could make their own nest, and they didn't have to deal with all of the bullshit that goes along with having the female. Okay? And this was the female paradise, supposedly. But population doesn't go up when that happens. Now, this behavior, mice are adapt to their behavior a lot faster than humans do. But you can see what happens is, as this behavior is prolonged and there's no predation and there's no need for reproduction, in every single case, right here, the unavoidable societal collapse in the decline period. Well, how in the world would that happen? But in every single study that he did, the final population at the end of the study was 0 mice. They all died off. They just stopped breeding. They just stopped striving. They stopped exploring their environment. They stopped going out and finding new areas because there were no new areas to find. Okay? All of the males had mated with all of the females. There was no more need for any kind of new exploration. And the entire society died out. Not just this one experiment. He did this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And what happened every single time? The mice died out. Okay? He even did experiments where at the very end he would take 5 or 6 of the mice out and try to start a new society. And those new mice wouldn't mate, wouldn't breed, wouldn't fight for territory, wouldn't do anything. They just ate, slept, groomed, and died. That's all they did. Okay? So that's what happens when women finally take over our society. When all of the decisions that are made are not masculine, and all of the decisions are made for women and children. Okay? Women sit on the couch, eat bonbons, get fat, don't take care of their kids, let the state take care of their kids, and our society dies out. Okay? So let's talk about some specifics in these exploit, equilibrium, decline, and strive areas. Okay? In the strive area, it was simulated overpopulation, right? They did territorial things at the beginning, and they adjusted because they still thought that they needed to have male-dominated ideas, right? Then in the exploit period, okay, the use of resources became unbalanced despite equal territory, and the male's wealth got transferred to the females, okay? Even though in the habitat it was identical in structure and opportunity. Every single mouse colony had the exact same size and the exact same amount of food and water. Okay? Then in the equilibrium period, which is kind of the killing period, violence became increasing. They exploited the system. The alpha males became bloodied. All right. They had cannibalism within here. That's why a lot of these mice died. They chewed on each other's tails, chewed some of themselves to death, ripped off from each other. Okay. Some of the beta males, like I said, became the beautiful ones. All they did was eat, sleep, and groom themselves. This is kind of like the herbivore men of Japan, or what I call the fish men, right? And then finally, in the decline phase, it was a behavioral sink. This is societal elitism. It leads us to a behavioral sink. Okay? Unable to return to normal masculine activities. The population just died off because there were no more masculine behaviors needed or perceived to be needed, and they hadn't been needed for so long. Boom, society dies. Okay? So that is the social elitism aspect of this. This is the feminine paradise up here, right? And this society, if we follow it along, is just going to die off. Okay, so now let's talk about elite economics. And I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on this. I'm going to try to, it's very, very deep, and there's a lot of stuff that you should probably already know, but I'm going to touch on it. Okay? We have to go all the way back to 1776 and the Wealth of Nations and a guy named Adam Smith. And he wrote a book called The Wealth of Nations. If you haven't read it, you can read it if you want some 800 level economics. Okay? The stuff that I'm going to be talking about here is master's level and PhD level economics, but I'm going to just barely touch on it. Okay? But it's good information for you to have anyways, but I need to get it out there so that you have a base understanding to where elite economics comes from. Okay? Adam Smith talked about in his book Wealth of Nations protectionism and free trade. And what is in our news all the time? Free trade agreements, NAFTA, the Atlantic Free Trade and the Pan-Pacific Free Trade Agreement and all of this stuff. Okay, now why free trade? Believe it or not, this is from almost 250 years ago. These economic principles are still out there. Okay, you have protectionism and you have free trade. Originally, everybody kind of started off in protectionism. And what protectionism is say I have a widget and I make a widget in the United States, but they make the same widget in China. Okay, and over here it costs $20 to make this widget. In China, it costs $2 to make this widget. Protectionism is when China ships that widget over here to the United States and it goes up on the shelf, the Chinese version is $2, the American version is $20. So everybody buys the $2 version, right? So then American businesses go out of business, right? So what you do is you put an $18 tariff on every widget that comes in to the United States from China. Then the Chinese widget costs $20 and the American widget costs $20, and you have equal trade, right? You don't put a burdensome tariff on it like $25 so that it costs more for Chinese. You make it equal, and then the consumer gets a choice between the two widgets, but they both cost the same. Then you're making choices on quality. That's protectionism. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is everybody talks about free trade, but our world wasn't built on free trade. Our world was built on protectionism. There are two countries in the history of trade that have made it on free trade. One is 1840s Netherlands. In the 1840s, the Netherlands invoked free trade and their country grew. And the other one is Hong Kong. That's it. And Hong Kong is just a free trade area within China, which is a big country, right? So those are the only two places in the world where free trade has actually built, I'm going to say that word again, built the country economically. Every other country in the world has been built by protectionism. So this idea of free trade, where the fuck does it come from? I bet it comes from the elitists. Does it come from the elitists? Let's ask Eddie, the elitist eagle. Does it come from you, Eddie? I would prefer not to comment at this point. I would like to invoke my Fifth Amendment right to not incriminate myself. Yeah, so you know what that means. Yeah, it comes from the elitists. Now, having taken many economic courses, I can honestly say that free trade is the only way that we can go forward. But you have to understand that the reason that we're doing it isn't for you and me. The reason that we're doing it is for Eddie here. Now, what does free trade do? We're experiencing it ever since NAFTA, ever since Ross Perot said that sucking sound that comes from Mexico when we opened up NAFTA. All the stuff that Ross Perot said was going to happen happened because it's economics. It's supply and demand. It's elasticity of price. It's all of that stuff that you learn in your basic economics classes. Businesses go where it's cheap to make things, to bring it back, to sell it at a cheaper cost, to make more money, to make more profit. There's no way around it. It's basic economics. Now, why do I say we have to go this way? Well, the thing that free trade does, and unfortunately, my entire generation and the next generation is going to suffer from this. My parents' generation and my grandparents' generation got the advantages of protectionism. They got to work in the factories for $28 an hour almost their whole life. They got to be part of unions. They got to have that protectionism around our country. But Mexico, India, Japan, South Africa, Russia, Poland, all of those countries were suffering during my parents' and grandparents' time, right? So all of the countries of the world, and I understand what they're trying to do. If you're the president of a country, free trade is the only way that you can go. But what happens when you have free trade? If you're a rich country, you become poorer via free trade. If you're a poor country, you become richer. Water seeks its own level. So over my lifetime in the United States, wages have gone down from, let's say, $28 an hour to now 25 to 30 years later, people are doing those same jobs that used to be $28 an hour for $14 an hour. But people in Mexico that used to do that job for a nickel an hour are now making $14 an hour. So the question is, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to make the world better for humans, or are you just trying to make your country better? And that is the fundamental problem that you have if you're the president of Mexico, or the president of Spain, or the president of Portugal. Do I just make my country better, or do I try to make the whole world better? Now, here's the thing. In the long run, me, my kids, you, your kids, and your grandkids are going to get lower wages. But in the long run, everybody's wages will be equal. So people in South America will be more equal than people in the United States. This is the thing that you have to understand about free trade, and this is why there's no going back. There's no going back to protectionism. If we went back to protectionism tomorrow, all that would happen was all the countries that are around us that we raise the tariffs, they would then raise tariffs on all of our exports. And then we raise tariffs more, and then they raise tariffs more, and then you get this trade war going on, okay, where you have winners and losers and rich countries and poor countries again, okay? So I understand the idea. Now, the problem that we have with free trade, aside from what I just told you, is that the next 3 generations are going to suck for us. And then it'll be equal around the whole planet, and it won't matter. Everybody will get the same wage, and nobody will know any different, right? The problem is you do need protectionism in 3 different areas. You need infant industries, sunset industries, and to protect against dumping. And I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to use the same example for all 3 of these. Say you are Portugal, and new technology comes out, and it's called a teleportation marble. It's just a little marble, and you hold it in your hand, and you can teleport with anywhere within 100 miles. You just push it goes into a little machine, or maybe you put it into your phone, and you push a button, and you can teleport instantly 100 miles anywhere in any direction that you want to, and it costs nothing. Problem is, 99% of these marbles all are in Portugal, and the other 1% is spread out through the rest of the world. Well, Portugal has a monopoly on these things, basically, right? So you have an infant industry in the United States, let's say. So you're trying to gather up all of the marbles that you can that are, your 1/10 of 1% in the United States to try to get your industry developed. Well, Portugal can just come in and buy those at market price and buy all the ones from Germany and buy all the ones from Russia and buy all of the ones from wherever and still and maintain their monopoly. So you set up in that condition when you have an infant industry around the world, then you set up trade barriers so that to buy one from Portugal costs the same as to buy one from the United States, right? Now they could just go over to Canada and buy them, but Canada hopefully is going to put up trade barriers as well. So when you have an infant industry that's just starting, you need that. Now let's talk about the same thing, a sunset industry. Well, when these teleport marbles come out, cars, a lot of planes, going back and forth to work, vehicles aren't going to be needed anymore because you can just teleport to work, teleport home, teleport to the grocery store. It's only 100 miles. So planes will be used to go like cross country and stuff like that. But, back and forth to work and all that stuff, you won't need automobiles. So automobiles will become a sunset industry. So they're going to slowly start going out of business. So you would use protectionism in that case also to protect yourself and keep cars being made and keep that industry afloat for a little while, maybe 10 years or 20 years, until that slowly goes out of business, right? And then, of course, there's dumping, and this is the biggest use. What if Portugal really wanted to just get into the American market? They didn't care about China, Russia, or anything like that. They just want to get into the American market. They'd sell their little stone $20 to all the rest of the countries, but they would sell their stones for a penny in the United States. Then with even your tariff that you would add on, it would still be cheaper to buy a stone from Portugal than one that was made in the United States, right? So they could dump all of their stones into the United States until all the businesses that headstones in the United States went out of business. This is kind of what Walmart does. Then they just raise their price back up to $20 again. After all the United States businesses are out of business. That's called dumping. Okay? So now that we understand that, how does this, from an elite standpoint, how does this control us? It's just like I told you, monopolies are the outcomes. This is what happens when elitists come in, and I'm gonna say this to you really quick. Our food industry is a monopoly. Our media is a monopoly. There's only 5 or 6 companies that own all of our media. 5 or 6 companies that make all of the food and beverages, beer, sodas, all of that stuff that's made, juice drinks, energy drinks, sports drinks, all made by about 6 or 7 companies. Fertilizer, seeds, big pharma makes about 6 companies make all of the blood pressure medication, antibiotics, all of the stuff that you need for medicine. All that stuff is made by these very, very, very large corporations, okay? And they're all owned by these people, okay? And what are you? You're a worker, man. You're breeding stock and you're a worker, all right? So the thing that you have to understand is this global free market thing that is going on in all countries around the world is set up to make everybody into a worker, okay? And to make everybody into a worker equally, right? So that when they open a business, they already know that labor is going to be status quo and they can do it anywhere and it's going to be the same price. They can open in Mexico, they can open in Florida, they can open in Alaska, they can open in Nova Scotia, they can open it up in Germany, and the wages and the labor is going to be a constant because they have global trade. They have free trade throughout the world. Okay? So that's what you have to think about when it comes to elitist economics. This is what free trade is about. It's about turning you into a worker. So now, let's talk about the last one, systemic elitism. Okay? The way that you can see the systemic elitism, okay, it's in your healthcare. Who has healthcare? Okay? I think Chris Tucker does a joke, or maybe Chris Rock does a joke about he had 2 grandparents. One of his grandparents, I think his father was an alcoholic, got sick while he was still poor before he became famous. And his grandfather died a pretty severe death from cirrhosis of the liver. Very, very painful. Okay. Then he got rich, became a comedian, got very, very rich, a multimillionaire. Then his mother got cancer. And the outcome was completely different. His mother had chemotherapy, he had money, he had the best health care that money could provide. And she lived, and she's still alive and lives a very nice, long, healthy life now that's comfortable. Okay? So think about that. Elitist healthcare. Also, police. Ask yourself a simple question. Are you afraid of the police? Okay? Is it a police state? When police are driving around in tanks, when police are using M16s, AK-47s, assault helmets, assault weapons, protective gear that's used for military, bulletproof vests and stuff like that, are they there to protect and serve, or are they just there to enforce policy? Chances are they're there to enforce policy. And then the other part of systemic elitism is the military. Okay, and England does this, Germany does this, but the United States does this more than any other country. They use their military to enforce policy and economic goals all throughout the entire world. And you have the legal system, right? As MGTOWs, we always talk about the child support system and the feminized version of the legal system where any kind of freedom of choice or any kind of freedom is slowly becoming criminalized. And men are being created to be ATM machines. You're here to produce, you're here to work and sleep. Okay? Now you ask yourself this question. Are you afraid of the police? Who's in jail? Okay, this is how you know that you're in systemic elitism. And ask yourself this question. Who's in jail? Are petty technical offenses jailable for felonies? Possession of marijuana, drinking in public, not wearing a helmet, prostitution, stuff like that. Petty social offenses. Are those people put in jail? How many people are in jail for 5, 6, 7, 8 years for having a little bit of marijuana on them? Okay. Are the wrong people in jail? That's the first question you ask yourself. And then the second question you ask yourself about systemic elitism is, are the wrong people that should be in jail not in jail? When you have all the bankers from '08, all the CEOs from Countrywide Mortgage and Principal Residential and Chase Manhattan Bank that robbed 40 million Americans out of their mortgages, out of their houses, out of their properties, left millions of people on food stamps and homeless, not just in the United States, throughout the entire fucking world through that collapse. How many of them are in jail? Zero. Zero bankers, okay? Canada, it's interesting. I live right next door to Canada. Canada did not have a crisis in '08. Do you know why? Because they never got rid of the separation between residential banks for mortgages and commercial banks for the stock market. So there's a barrier in Canada. So people didn't lose their houses and stuff like that and go into bankruptcy in Canada because there was no residential crisis. Because when you go to buy your house in Canada, you go to a residential bank and all they have is residential mortgages. They didn't play the stock market like they did in the United States on Wall Street. Okay? That's something that's good to know. Are the wrong people in power? Are the wrong people in jail, the wrong people out of jail, the wrong people in power? When you see enormous crimes being committed by politicians, when you see things that are being done, people are being killed by politicians and nobody goes to jail, okay? It's this obey, apathy, be part of the herd, okay? They force you into this through the legal system, through the police state, through the military, right? Through just holding on to your job, so you can pay your rent, okay? Are the rules of law being used to maximize the elite's goals and not the people's goals? Okay? Are the laws for the elite, are they a plague upon the people? Okay? When you see laws every day when you get in your car that you could get pulled over 10 different times and go to jail for 3 or 4 years just for doing something, having Adderall that's your son's prescription in your ashtray. On your way to work, you get pulled over. They find the Adderall. It's not your prescription. Well, it's my son's prescription. Yeah, but your son's not here. And you go to jail. Anything like that. We need to observe civil disobedience to the state. illegitimate authority, okay, we have a right to act against it or abolish governments. And that's a masculine idea. The First Amendment is a masculine idea. The Second Amendment is there. The right to bear arms is there to protect the First Amendment. Okay? A lot of people don't understand. We have a right to abolish, in the United States, we have a right to abolish our government by force because it was done once before, and that's what the Second Amendment's there for. And, that's probably what's going to come out of this. It's one of the few ways that you get out of this predicament that we're in. And we'll talk about that in a little while. The other part of it is down here, this police state, right? You can see it. The first thing that happened with these right to let Black Lives Matter and all this stuff, people started taking pictures, and these new phones. This is hell for the police because the police want to keep doing their bullshit that they do, right? First thing that starts coming out, no cameras, laws against filming. They're making laws against filming the police. So you don't have a right. You become a criminal for taking a picture or taking a film. How long until what I'm doing right now on YouTube becomes construed as treason or sedition, and Rooster is a terrorist and a criminal, right? How long? 5 years from now? This YouTube video that I'm putting out right now on this and talking about these ideas, watch it now. You know why? Because 5 years from now, 10 years from now, this video right fucking here that you are watching right now may be illegal. Do you understand that? This is how the system works. This is how systemic elitism works. They get rid of people like me that talk about stuff like this. If they're having problems because the police are getting caught killing people on film, instead of stopping the police from killing people, what do they make illegal? Oh, well, they make filming it illegal, All right. So go back really quick. Here's the elitist Elysium. All right. Right down here. And there's 3 different areas. First is social elitism, which I told you, feminine ideas and the feminine paradise in mice anyways, and throughout our history as well, lead to the destruction of society. Second is economically, and economic elitism, what they use is free trade to make sure that 99% of the planet stays as a worker and a renter and a leaser and not an owner. And the 1% can derive resources from those 99%. That's just like what women do. They derive resources from men. They transfer male wealth, work, and labor into capital. Okay? And then the third way that elitists do it is systemic elitism. And the way that they do that, they control your health care so they can kill you off when they want to. They control the police. They make a police state. They make laws where even the most inane thing will turn you into a criminal. They militarize everything on the planet, and then they use the legal system to keep you in the system, to keep you on parole, to keep you in jail. If you're not going to act right, if you're going to be a rooster and you're going to say things like I'm saying on YouTube right now, we're going to put you in jail. Okay? So that's not quite where we're at right now, but this is a future that we could be seeing relatively soon. All right. That's all I got for today, guys. The next thing that we're going to talk about is not necessarily the elitist corporation side of it. We're going to talk about governmental societal control. Because once you get to this point, you have to have severe controls enacted to keep people in this situation. And a lot of this is about prolonging this for the alphas and the elitists so that they continue to extract resources from the other 99% of the population. But anyways, that's all I have. If you disagree with me or you want to make some comments, put it down in the comment section. I'd love to hear about it. But as always, take it easy.